Welcome to the Sheth Leadership Academy Lecture Series, a series of lectures delivered by Professor Jagdish Sheth, one of the top management thinkers in globalization and changing demographics. He's the author of numerous business books, including Chindia Rising and The Rule of Three. This lecture is part one of the 7 side effects of the internet age. I hope you enjoy.
Internet is probably the most transformative technology so far that we have invented, we have discovered or created. And I think we have not as yet fully understood the side effects or the negative consequences, unintended consequences of the internet. It is still a rising technology, and as it becomes more universal, it might be better for us to actually anticipate those side effects or unintended consequences and hopefully minimize them or even prevent them if possible. So this will be not on the positive side of the internet, but on the dark side of the internet. The title of the presentation I have made is the 7 side effects of the internet age, and subtitle is the dark side of the digital technology or digital revolution. So let me just start by looking at the technologies. If you look at the evolution of technologies historically, we had technologies which improved the agricultural products, or what I call the agricultural age, by improving the agricultural sector, making it more productive through mechanism, automation, etc. We improved the productivity enormously, and in the process economic development. Then we have the industrial age, which are all very familiar, and I'll talk a little more about the industrial age and the side effects or the unintended consequences of the industrial age. Of course, then we went into the services age. Most advanced countries shifted from manufacturing to services, as the United States has done. And now we are into what everybody calls the internet age. Internet age or internet technology, my view, will be more disruptive, first of all, discontinuity, and more transformative over the whole society, not just on the business side, but the family side, the political governance side. All institutions will be impacted, and it will be more transformative than any other technology that we have so far discovered or invented or created. So let's look into the evolution of the technologies and what we did. In the agricultural age, we really made farming more modern, as opposed to the primitive farming, very much a labor intensive and cattle intensive, like the bullock carts or the horses, or the buffaloes, whatever we think about even today, in the rice paddies, for example, or growing the wheat. We mechanized everything, and that mechanization resulted into an enormous productivity. So today, at least in the US, we claim that one farmer can produce enough grain or enough agricultural product for about feeding 70 people. That's quite a lot. And by the way, we did that not just in terms of grains, but also we did that with animals, for example, the way we created the whole mass production chicken, for example, mass production beef, for example, mass production of shrimp, everything. And the technologies we used were modern farming techniques. We had land grant universities, every state had one. They had this agricultural extension people who went out and educated farmers how to improve their yield or productivity, how to conserve the soil, for example, how to use more pesticides, insecticides, etc., etc. We also invented tractors and combines. I mean, today these are huge machines, probably as much like an aircraft type. They're so automated today, in fact, and they're, of course, internet enabled now. And the third thing we did very well was the development of hybrid seeds, which means a seed that will produce more yield than the previous generations. In the industrial age, we created the automation of blue-collar work, factory workers essentially. Started with the textile revolution in England, for example. That's how the industrial revolution came to displace labor. The demand was very large for the garments. Cotton came, cotton had to be spun, made into a yarn, made into a garment, etc. And the number of workers were just not enough in England, and so they started the industrial revolution in the textile industry. We also learned the assembly principle, that's at the turn of the last century, around 1900s, and that is where we saw the mass production. How do you make components and put them together rather than build everything from the scratch? And of course, Henry Ford and his Model T on an assembly level changed the whole paradigm. Later on, we really began to focus on TQM, or total quality management. or lean operations is the new word that we find. Bunch of processes put together, but the obsession was that there should be zero defect if possible in the product output. And how do you create the inputs transformed into output with no defects? What about this services age? Services age, we have really done automation of the white collar work, primarily the clerical. How many of you remember before word processors, we all used to have secretaries and stenopull for people who took the shorthands. There was a mimeograph machines. Those days are gone. Today everything is on a computer essentially. And today all I need in an office is a receptionist. I don't need a secretary in many ways. I do my own emails. I do my own appointments, etc. And what we did with the automation of the clerical white collar is now happening with the automation of the white-collar professionals, managerial class, professors, for example, scientists, for example. We are automating everything, especially with the rise of the internet and the broadband technologies. Second major thing we learned in the services industries, it began in the manufacturing, but we really are getting a lot more into it, what one would call mass personalization or mass customization. Mass customization was the coin or the word phrased in manufacturing. Mass personalization is in services and counters. In fact, mass personalization is more appropriate in a services industry because it is too much encounter with individual consumers, users, customers, their experience as we call it today, and therefore mass customization or mass personalization is a very key services age technology. And the last one we have done is to do everything self-service. Today, the customers become your pseudo-employees. They do all the work, essentially. So getting the workforce out and making it more and more automated is the services age. Now comes the internet age. And the internet age, here are the three major things that we have done. First of all, the rise of the cell phone industry altogether. This is more transformative probably than the growth of the PC industry, which distributed storage and processing from mainframe computers called CPUs, central processing unit, to the PC, desktop first, then of course the laptop, but even bigger revolution has been the cell phones. The numbers are staggering. Today probably more than 3 billion cell phone users are out there in the world. It's about half the population at least, maybe even more. And it has basically democratized access to information, access to transactions, and therefore what I call level playing field. In fact, Tom Friedman's book, The World is Flat, is absolutely true. It is much flatter today between advanced economies and emerging economies, and much flatter between the rural and the urban, much flatter between the literate and the not so literate, etc., etc. So there's a level playing field. One that we have not talked about as much in the internet age is the true affordability of storage and devices. Think about how much capability today we have in a digital phone, digital camera. Unimaginable. A professional quality, a Nikon or a Canon, I can have it in the hands, point and shoot kind of a camera with all the capabilities, and the quality, because it's digitized, is about the same in many ways. So that's affordability of handsets, the cell phones, the digital phones or digital cameras is mind-boggling. And storage, have you seen how much storage? I think in my flash drive I can store more information than probably a library today. I just cannot even imagine the amount of storage I can do in a small little device, which otherwise would require hold my basement filled with books, or as I call a library by and large. The internet has had one more change that I would like to talk about. So if you look at the infrastructure technologies, which is what internet is all about, and look at its impact on trade and commerce. So in the 1800s, shipping and railroads became the dominant mode, and they were organized around the shipping of products, or product mobility as I call it. And I'll talk about it, why it happened as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution, let's say a century ago. Then we began to invent automobiles on the one hand and airplanes on the other hand. In the 1900s, those are the two key technologies, and what it did was to create people mobility. While railroads also transported people, but I think the much bigger impact has been by the automobile and the airplanes, so I call it people mobility, which is the 1900s, last century. And the 21st century, this century, it's all about knowledge mobility. Mobility about information, mobility about transactions. I just call it a knowledge mobility, and that is due to cell phones and the internet that we created by and large. Let me now talk about the side effects. Every breakthrough technology has side effects or unintended consequences. While all technologies are very beneficial to human life, which we all know, well documented, there are hundreds of books written about these. I think we also need to study the side effects or the unintended consequences. For example, how much life has been transformed by inventions of automobile with personal freedom, personal travel. We live like roommate families. And the telephone, access anywhere in the world by a call on a real-time basis, as opposed to the old mail system when we wrote letters, for example. And of course, the television. Television today, especially through cable television and satellite, can reach anywhere in the world in terms of offering information, entertainment, education in a broadcast mode, or in a one-to-many as we call it. A breakthrough technology, therefore, is like a potent drug or medicine. The more potent the drug, the greater the side effects, is what I have generally observed. I'm sure there are exceptions where there's a miracle drug or a miracle medicine we have invented with minimal side effects. I can think myself of aspirin in that category, for example. Maybe some of the vaccines I can put it in that category, but those are rare. Generally, more potent the medicine, greater the side effects. There's a positive correlation, which is what I assert, which is what I emphasize here by and large, and that's what we need to understand. Let's look at this from the Industrial Revolution viewpoint. What's the fundamental change that Industrial Revolution brought, let's say from the previous agricultural age to the industrial age? In my analysis, I finally put it together. It's like a discovery one day. I got very excited. Industrial Revolution basically separated or divorced production from consumption, which led to need for trade, commerce, shipment, storage, etc. While it has done a fantastic job, as you know, our life has become much better today with mechanical and then electromechanical devices, gadgets, all the technology, running water, for example, electricity goes on, but we have had unintended consequences, one on the environment and the other one is the lifestyle of the human beings. We already know that Industrial Revolution is directly related to the increase in the carbon footprint. In my lectures on sustainability, I've been amazed to see how much carbon footprint is arising because the production is separated from consumption, which means not only the carbon footprint at the factory level and the warehouse and the storage level, but also transport, and then ultimately the biggest carbon footprint, surprisingly, is at home, where we have the refrigerators, we keep the food stored there, as opposed to the old agricultural age where you made it today and consumed today. You made it here and consumed here, but today that's not the case. I mean, I can have a product made anywhere in the world and in my refrigerator, which I can consume a month later, 4 months later, or in my pantry, if not my refrigerator. This has had a huge impact on water. We are finally realizing how much nature's gift, water, which is free, we have destroyed. We have contaminated industrial pollutants. And today, everybody in sustainability talks about water is the most strategic, scarce resource. And just like we had the oil wars, people are now forecasting about water wars. It will be such a scarce commodity. And of course, deforestation. In order to create land for modern living, modern housing, subdivisions, factories, we began to take the land meant for nature and other wildlife species, and deforestation began to happen. This is all well documented, so I don't need to elaborate the point. And the last one we did as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution, divorce of production from consumption, was primarily reduce the biodiversity. I remember doing some research study on the corn species in America, and from 2,500 corn species, we are down to maybe less than 20 because certain species have greater yield. We homogenize quite a lot, and that homogenization is creating unintended consequences. While these are obviously documented, what is not as well documented is the modern lifestyle, which what Industrial Revolution offered us. More sedentary lifestyle, Not as much hard work that we did outside, walking, for example, tilling, for example, whatever we did. While the life has been much better today than in the agricultural age, but it has created a number of what is called as non-communicable diseases. We all know all about the communicable diseases, epidemiology as it is called, such as cholera, flu, typhoid, etc. These are the diseases of man-made creation, and they include rise in the cardiac diseases, heart diseases, hypertension, which has been now found to be a very fundamental cause of the consequence of the modern lifestyle in many ways. Respiratory diseases, lung diseases, mostly tied to smoking so far, tobacco, etc. Diabetes, another major non-communicable disease, and the new one rising in a very significant way is mental health. If you take these 5 chronic diseases or syndromes, what you find is the estimate that is staggering. This is done by the World Economic Forum, also by Harvard Kennedy School of Public Health, and the estimates are that the total cost to the society of this industrial life that we have would be at least $45 trillion by 2030, and nobody knows how to pay for it. While we are worried about quite a lot about social security and pension plans, and as people live longer and longer, healthcare costs are even much more dramatic. And who is going to pay for this one is a big debate among all governments. They cannot sustain themselves in subsidizing this or paying that. Insurance is not enough, it looks like, and it's a worldwide phenomenon, therefore how do you manage? So what have we learned from the industrial age where the unintended consequences were so significant? We have learned one thing: prevention is better than correction, and therefore the cost of the environmental cleanup, which is correction now, is again multi-billion dollars, reversing the air pollution, water pollution, etc., etc., removing chemicals out of the environment somehow. And we just talked about the healthcare costs. Second thing we have learned is that active intervention is necessary to counterbalance free market forces. Just leaving it to the market forces of consumption and production or demand and supply is going to create more these unintended consequences, as we have seen in the automobile industry, correlation with the pollution directly, for example. While we may have tinkered with, let's say, something like lead, for example, lead-free gasoline, I remember that, that's not enough. Today we are thinking about how we can have hybrid cars that have totally clean energy, whether it's from natural gas or electricity. We have all electric cars rolling out. Alternate energy sources are coming. But actually it requires a policy active intervention, either from a social activism or a public policy activism. Market forces will always create the side effects. So how do you balance the two becomes a major debate in a society. And unfortunately, these consequences created by the Industrial Revolution with the separation of production and consumption is global, which means there is no some such thing as each nation deciding on their own. How do you do it on a global cooperative basis, some form of a what I would call a shared governance essentially. So welcome to the age of internet. It's the fastest adoption of any technology globally. In less than 50 years, and I'm giving you much longer timeline, it may be only 35 years, internet users have grown to more than 2 billion people. I'm not talking about cell phones, I'm talking about connectivity to the cell phone. The cell phone generation is here. In fact, in the telephone industry, people at one time thought cell phone would be for emergency calls. I use it as a backup in case you cannot reach me on my landline phone because I'm not at home or in the office when you call me. Today, cell phone is the primary. So what was a peripheral device has become core, and the landlines are going faster and faster, declining worldwide. In fact, those countries where there was always a scarcity of landlines because they were all government-owned telephone companies, did not have the capital budgets to invest into expanding the number of users, like India, like China, all countries by and large. They even skipped the landline generation, started only with the cell phones. And today all young generation people only know cell phones. They don't even know how the physical phone looked like in the landline days. So interestingly. So this is a significant phenomenon. This is compounded by the emergence of social media. I put it as a part of the internet. Now that you are connected by network to smart devices, what are the applications? So this is the Facebook nation. It is as big as a nation, maybe the third largest nation right after India and China, definitely has crossed more than 1 billion population. And if you take the Facebook and other social media platforms all put together, non-overlapping, will probably have at least 2 or more than 2 billion people across the globe connected on a real-time basis. Instant access to information and social conversations or social chatter is here pretty much. This is just the starting point. When we connect billions of people who are constantly in conversation or in transaction or in information, we also now have the next wave where we are going to attach the internet actually to devices, to machines. Industrial internet as it is called, or Internet of Things, which is the phrase coined by Cisco Systems and heavily promoted and popularized by General Electric, for example. So the Internet of Things and the future of what people call smart devices and dumb people. Just like with the calculators, we forgot how to calculate. Without a calculator, we cannot do any fractions anymore. We forgot to do engineering formulas because we had Texas Instruments come out with great engineering devices for architects and engineers. So all the complicated logarithmic formulas, we just don't know how to do it anymore. So the people are becoming dumber and dumber, surprisingly, even though they have more intelligence and more brain power probably, and the dumb things, which were the devices, are becoming smarter and smarter, especially with artificial intelligence, which is now becoming very mainstream. It is getting a hardened technology, and you have the expert learning systems built into the machines by and large. So Internet of Things is going to move this even further out in terms of the major impact of the technology on our life in general. The benefits it has provided. I'll come to the side effects in a moment. Internet is probably the only technology, if you analyze all the technologies, which has made very affordable. So ability to pay, affordability, willingness to pay, affordability, as barriers to entry into the marketplace have gone. Today, anybody can afford a cell phone. Device is so inexpensive. Today, anybody can afford a digital camera. It's so inexpensive. Just goes on. I can give you all the examples. Cell phones, digital cameras, storage devices, digital storage devices. I mean, I can have a flash drive, $10 or something with gigabytes of capacity. It's unheard of, unthinkable, right? We also have provided with the internet global access or a reach. Reach is incredible. So e-commerce today, I can do it from anywhere to anywhere, essentially. And you have all the online services like airlines and banking. I can do it from anywhere to anywhere at any time. And the third one, a very key one, is unprecedented opportunities internet has created for entrepreneurs. In fact, it's not at all an exaggeration that in the last 50 years, we probably have produced more 1 million millionaires what took more than 200 years before to create millionaires in the world. And these millionaires are not just in advanced economies. If anything else, they're a lot more in emerging economies. And of course, you have a few billionaires also from emerging economies, like Carlos Slim from Mexico, for example, who is neck and neck running with Warren Buffett on the one hand and Bill Gates on the other hand. Remember the three names. One is based on technology, the PC revolution. Other one is a private equity, and a third one is a strict entrepreneur who gets into the right business at the right time and creates a wealth for himself and for others. So millionaires is probably a very conservative count, especially when you see all the employees of startup companies in Silicon Valley and other places suddenly becoming millionaires because their stock options have become very valuable. So that's very key. I think the internet age has lowered the entry and exit barriers dramatically for entrepreneurs. It used to require a lot of technical capability, a lot of capital to be in any kind of an agricultural inventions or industrial inventions, even some service innovations. But in the internet age, my view is that the barriers to entry probably have dropped by 1,000 times. not 10 times, not 100 times, but 1,000 times, which means anybody who has a potential of wanting to be an entrepreneur can become an entrepreneur. Next one is that it's really democratized knowledge and influence. Knowledge we know quite a lot because I have now access to information anywhere about anything practically. I'm amazed when I search for things through, let's say, Google search on search engines. I can get things that I never expected to be online in terms of information, but more importantly, influence. We used to have the old opinion leadership theory, where you have a handful of people who will be actually knowledge. They will control the knowledge. They will therefore be most influential, whether those are Brahmins in India or those are teachers or professors. Today, influencers are everybody. I can be an influencer even though I'm a follower of you. I'm following you, but I can also influence you. So there's a whole peer-to-peer influence that has happened as opposed to the typical trickle-down influence that we all studied and researched. So peer-to-peer influence is a very massive change. Again, makes the society more egalitarian than ever before. Next one, the world is flat. And as I mentioned earlier, the differences between advanced and emerging economies, between the literate and the illiterate people, are declining dramatically as a consequence of the age of the internet. And internet has created now a new multi-trillion-dollar economy. Just like automobile created a brand new industry, airplanes created a brand new industry, telephone to some extent did the same thing. I think this one has created a whole together new economy, especially in terms of market valuations of companies like Facebook, Alibaba, Amazon, etc. really shows you that you can have a multiple, unimaginable multiple of a revenue or multiple of cash flow, at least if nothing else, to a level that was just not feasible, not considered appropriate with hard assets on your balance sheet. So all these things that we studied about Tobin's Q, what is your market value versus book value, becomes irrelevant now. And it's creating an enormous new economy altogether, which I think will be going through all of this 21st century. This is all the positive side. Now let me come to the dark side. And in part 1, I'm going to focus and just give you a brief review about 7 side effects of the internet age. First one is digital addiction. It's massive. I'll give you the numbers later on. And more people at a younger and younger age across cultures and faiths are becoming addicted to the internet. Second, we see the rise of the roommate nation. There is no some such thing as the family in the way we lived anymore. We have no time to have dinners together. Everybody comes at their own schedules, eats in their own schedule, and then goes back to their own room. And this is not limited to a handful of families, but this is universal almost. And given that, I call it the rise of the roommate nation. Third one, when the virtual world becomes real, which means more and more people are engaging into this virtual world, not just virtual reality, and they believe that is the real world than the actual real world. Or what Robert Putnam, a great sociologist, wrote a great book called Bowling Alone. Think about that. That's what we do. So we're getting a lot more individualized, a lot more atomistic. My world is just me, not my family, not my neighbors, not my community, not my nation even. This is a key side effect that we need to watch and see how it's going to impact the society. Next one is, I'm very concerned. I think this is the age of public acrimony. There is no decency. There are no rules of engagement of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. People say things in the anonymity of the broadcast, as I call it, things that they prefer afterwards, afterthought they should not have said. They are very impulsive, and there does not seem to be any resolution on any topic today, and therefore in the process we see more extremism rising, extreme views are rising, and there's no way out. So the public acrimony and its consequences on society is one more thing I will talk about. That's the fourth side effect. The fifth side effect that we know quite a lot is cyber crimes or white collar crimes. I call it the epidemic of cyber crimes. I don't think it's a small event. I think it's massive, as I will talk about in part 2, some of the numbers. And what to do about that one eventually. The next one is unusual. I don't think it's written up quite a lot about this area. I think with the rise of the internet economy, we will see lots of stranded assets or surplus physical real estate. Shopping centers would be obvious targets, but there are many more like factories, etc., which I will talk about. So when you have so much of stranded assets for which the society paid at one time, what do you do with those assets if they are not useful anymore? It is like ghost towns when the factories left, factories shut down, let's say for moving to lower wage, like moving from North to South in America, or moving from America to China or abroad someplace for manufacturing. We have ghost towns. There's a lot of real estate out there sitting doing nothing, and more vacant the real estate, the more dangerous that real estate becomes. So what do you do with those stranded assets as a side consequence or an unintended consequence? And the last one is again very fascinating. There is a jurisdiction which is in jeopardy. Which jurisdiction are we talking about? All public governance comes based upon jurisdiction. This is the space or a location within which I have a jurisdiction. And there's a timeline for jurisdiction. Laws are enforceable up to a certain point. But in the world of the internet age and the digital economy, there are no jurisdictions. Just like air pollution is borderless, it is global, internet economy is the same way. So if that is the case, then what happens on location-centric jurisdiction, and therefore who is in charge? So I will talk about all these 7 side effects in much more detail in the second half of my presentation, or what we call part 2.
Thanks for listening to this lecture, part 1 of the 7 side effects of the internet age, with Professor Jagdish Sheth. For more about Professor Sheth and the Sheth Leadership Academy, visit www.shethleadershipacademy.com.